Hi and welcome to this masterclass on creating a short film. This is the first of 5 parts, which is going to be an introduction to me, as well as the processes I go through to making a short kind of documentary piece. My name's Ben. I'm a producer for a production company called Somersault, based in Cambridge. I also like to create my own kind of passion projects on people that create things, and that's one of the focuses that we're going to be looking at today. In terms of my journey to where I am today as a senior producer, I started off life in imaging as a photographer. So I got my first camera at quite a young age. I was introduced to photography by my dad and my uncle, who are very keen photographers, and we kind of travelled about, and it was mostly air displays and things like that that we were photographing. And any chance that I had going on holiday, I'd photograph kind of landscapes or the scenes that were kind of in front of me. From then, I kind of developed my skills as a photographer. I went to college and studied media. This kind of afforded me a bit more insight into what it takes to create kind of moving image and how to better my skills as a photographer as well. That kind of opened doors up for me in terms of where I could go, and really work experience was one of my first proper kind of insights into production, and that was through doing some work experience for the BBC. I learned a lot of my time there. I learned a lot with audio as well as video, and that kind of really gave me a footing as to what it's like to work in a professional industry. From there, I've kind of had my first DSLR, which was the first camera that I shot on, which was a 5D Mark II, and that was really one of the first cameras that was kind of accessible to anyone to shoot video on. But yeah, the camera would only shoot 25 frames, so you couldn't really do slow motion unless you were going to shoot in standard HD, so 720. It didn't have 4K, didn't have image stabilization. It was really a stills camera that just happened to have quite a capable little video function compared to what was about on the market. Having this camera and being able to travel, being in bands, I shot a lot of videos, and that was really my first kind of experiences to producing my own work for myself. One of the kind of big difficulties I found at that point is I'd had several years of being a photographer and understanding the ins and outs of how a camera worked for stills and how to get the most out of my images and the scene, and also what I needed to do in terms of editing. Moving over to video from doing stills photography is it's a very different kind of world. So not only in understanding things like what shutter speed to use, what ISOs were kind of best to shoot in, kind of making that filmic look, that kind of aesthetic to your productions, and then moving on to editing, and the kind of even then the processing power you needed from your computer to do basic edits. It's really quite a new world for me. So I progressed through that, through being at college, learning how to edit, picking up bits of advice from friends and people I'd worked with in terms of editing. So comparing things to, this was almost 15 years ago that I got that camera, to now, things have really come a long way in terms of the processing power and capabilities of software, the cameras that are available, just the plethora of stuff that is available to kind of beginner filmmakers all the way up to that kind of professional level. It's really expanded over the last 15 years, and that's really helped filmmaking become more accessible. Much like photography, everything's got cheaper, so it is a lot more accessible, and even mobile devices are definitely more capable of creating very good video. So throughout that kind of journey from college to where I am now, I've picked up a lot of things in terms of kind of my own personal knowledge and practices. Some of them has developed from doing photography and being a photographer, and have transferred over to filmmaking. Things like composition, which is hard to teach. You've got to have a very good eye for composition. It's not always something that can just be picked up. In a lot of cases, you either have it or you don't, and that's going to make a big difference to the types of content and basically how good looking that content is. If you don't have that composition in you, if you can't compose a shot, you can still do everything else. You can still tell the story, you can still potentially light it well, you can still find the relevant kind of people that you want to champion their story, but aesthetically it's not going to be as pleasing as someone who has that eye for it. And that's why there are different jobs within film industries. So, you can be a producer or director, and you don't necessarily need that composition. I mean, you can have a director of photography who kind of has that skill set and can bring that to your production. But that's on kind of bigger productions. As well as the kind of composition and the visual side of things, I've also picked up quite a good ability of working with people, so people who I've never met before. So my first encounter with them could be them sitting in front of a camera in front of me, and it's just being able to get the most or the best out of them. And that can be very challenging in itself, so that's a skill that I feel I've picked up over the years and have finessed, and something that I'm quite pleased and proud that I can sit down with almost any subject and get the best out of them and really pull their story out. So as well as having that compositional technique down, being able to talk to people, it's also understanding what needs to go into a full production to basically put it in front of your audience and something that they're going to enjoy. And that takes time, that takes skill as well. So it's passion projects that I like to do that really do help me to hone those skills and really kind of practice and pull the best out of myself as a filmmaker and as a producer. So I've already touched a little bit on transitioning from being a stills photographer to a filmmaker and the skills that were able to be transferred from one to the other. But there's a lot more than that to kind of think of. As a stills photographer, you get to shoot in RAW. Now I know a lot of cameras are introducing RAW into kind of their capabilities, but that's only something that's been available commercially in the kind of last year or so, a couple of years. So as a filmmaker, it's just the importance of getting it right in camera. So that's things like white balance. Obviously your shutter speed needs to be correct. Just making sure that aesthetically you're getting everything that you need to, because you can't edit a image from a video as much as you can edit an image from a still. You don't have the kind of push and pull as you do with like raw images from a stills camera. So getting it right in camera is really important, and in my kind of beginner, in my early parts, that's a really tough, hard lesson to kind of learn, that you can't fall back on shooting in RAW. So the other thing to consider is, really, as a stills photographer, you take that one image and you put it in front of your audience, and your audience can view that image for as long as they want to. Now that can mean that they can pull out whatever story it is they want to from that image. They can look around the whole scene for as long as they want to. It's down to them to pull as much as they want to take away from it. With video, because you are feeding people the imagery for a finite amount of time until you get to the next shot and the next shot after that, it's about how many shots you need to build that scene. It's not just a case of setting up one shot and that is everything. I mean, even with this recording of me here, we have 2 cameras set up. And that's to kind of show a bit more of a story. It also gives me an opportunity to cut to the second camera if there are any cuts that I need to make in kind of my narrative and my audio. So that's another thing that you really need to take away, and that all needs planning before you go on a shoot. So not only is it a different way of working in the field, but you've also got to think about, we have touched on this a little bit, but the post-production side of things, editing, it's being a creative editor. So it's not just about making your image pop, it's actually about being able to tell that story properly, and that's a kind of skill in itself. So if you are a solo kind of filmmaker, you have to have that editor skill set as well. You can't just shoot some video and put it on a timeline and then export it and expect it to be good. You really have to work hard to kind of craft that narrative and that story and support it with the correct kind of B-roll or supporting images to really tell that story of that person or that scene or whatever it is, the story that you're telling. Not only do you have everything that we just discussed then, but it's also equipment side of things as well. Now, as a stills photographer, my kind of go-to would be landscape photography, or I do canine portraiture as well. And for that, I need a camera, a tripod, and a lens, and that's typically what I would take to any shoot. And obviously memory cards and batteries and things. Now, as a filmmaker, the opportunity to take such a little kit would be a godsend, but you wouldn't get the visuals out of it. So right now, as I said, I've got one camera, which is my main camera here. I've got a second camera there. Each of these cameras have monitors on. I have a light up here. I've got a microphone, which is just up here. This is on a boom stand. I've got a second boom arm here. And this is a relatively basic, quite lightweight setup. And as you'll see on the piece that I'm going to go and shoot for this project, I try and take a relatively small amount of kit with me on that as well. But production can really scale, and it depends on the crew that you have available as to who can help you set these lights up and who can set the cameras up and monitor and maintain them. Your kit that you need to take on a production is very scalable, but it's definitely a lot more than what you'd take on any kind of still shoot. Even if you're shooting in a studio with flashes and things, what you need to take for video can be a lot more. Now you can shoot kind of run and gun, as it's called, and that's, you know, using ambient light. It's a very documentary kind of style. But if you want to do these nice kind of sit down interviews, you're going to need some sort of lighting to really help kind of accentuate and pull your subject from the background and just really make the scene really pop. So if you are looking at moving from doing still photography to creating video, then if you've already got a stills camera that is made within the last decade, then chances are it does video. So you'll have the camera, lenses, you'll have media already that will shoot onto, you'll have the batteries that you need. So what I'd recommend is, you know, using and utilizing that equipment to kind of create these films. From then on, that can be your starting point, and then you can identify what it is that you need to move your production onto the next level, be that lighting, different audio, maybe an upgrade in your camera, maybe different lenses, maybe a better tripod. But it's until you start shooting, that's when you'll identify those kind of necessities, like what is it that you need to move your production onto the next level. So once you've started filming bits with your camera, so the camera that you've got, even if that is a smartphone or tablet or anything like that, anything that will shoot video, it's going to give you a good indication or a good starting point for kind of creating content. Once you've shot some stuff, it doesn't matter what it is, you can go out into your garden or out into the streets and film some scenes and really work out what it is you need to produce and create a story. Once you've done that, you can then learn how to edit. And that itself is a challenge. So there are loads of good online tutorials, and even part of this masterclass will go through my editing process, and I'll talk you through the ins and outs of how I go from the start of my editing process all the way through to the end to deliver my final piece. So that's a really important step, and you need to be able to edit your videos as well as shoot them. One bit of advice I can give is finding local filmmakers who create similar content to what I'll be going through in this masterclass. Just getting in contact with them, shadowing them, if it's friends or family that do video, just getting some time with them just to see like their processes. Working with people who, you know, have several tiers kind of above you skill level will really help bring you up towards their level. And that's something that I've done a lot to really learn things like lighting techniques, different shooting techniques as well, finding out about different bits of equipment as well. I found just learning and watching and shadowing people who are kind of the next level up from me has just been really invaluable. So this masterclass really is around me creating this piece of content that we're going to look at. So I'm going to talk you through how it is I go about finding these passion projects and kind of the steps that I take all the way up to actually the shoot day and then kind of onwards. So in terms of finding the projects, there's several different ways that I'll look at kind of finding the best project that I want to work on. First port of call would be something like Facebook or Facebook groups. They're really useful, especially if you have like town or village Facebook groups. You can put a post up there and then just see kind of what comments come back. Local news outlets, so that could be online or physical newspapers, like local ones you want to focus on. If there's any interesting stories that come up in those as well, for you to be able to contact those people. So they're kind of my two main kind of ports of call when it comes to how I find interesting people. In terms of how I go about picking, so if I get multiple people who have contacted me back, say from example, a Facebook post, how I go about picking who it is that I decide to do my piece on, it's mostly down to my first interaction with them. So you want to ideally pick someone who's quite talkative, someone who has a bit of confidence in what they talk about, someone who's passionate about what they talk about as well. So being able to have like a phone conversation with them or like a Zoom or Skype conversation with them, it's a really good kind of first step, and that's going to help you find out a little bit more about them and their product. Also, you're going to want to consider the aesthetics of it as well. So go through the 3 or 4 or even more kind of contacts that you get, and just think about aesthetically which of the projects are going to look the best, because that's what's going to keep your audience engaged and keep watching your piece of content. For this piece, we actually have this guy called Paul, and he makes pens, so like fountain pens. So I knew from my first contact with him, before I even talked to him on the phone, that actually this is going to be really interesting because he works with materials. So in terms of the supporting footage or B-roll, that's going to be quite interesting because he has a workshop that he works out of as well. He often or mostly works with wood, and that's turning wood, so there's some good shots that I know that we can have there. So from that point, it was just kind of having a phone conversation with him, finding out a little bit more about the types of pens that he makes, his processes, and that kind of gave me a better understanding of who he was as a person as well. And that really helped me pick him over a couple of others that I had lined up for this project. So after I found my subject, my first thing was just to kind of drop them an additional message to arrange a phone call with them. As I said before, being able to talk to them on the phone in depth is a really good way to find out more information before you actually go there. What you don't want to do is turn up to a shoot cold, not really knowing enough about their story and their backstory. I got on the phone with Paul, I had a good conversation with him. I was making notes as we were going through, so kind of how he started, the types of materials he works with, like what his processes are. Things like that help me create a list of questions that I'll ask him during the interview stage of our actual shoot. And that's kind of my first thing to do. Secondly, I would either plan a recce or site visit, so go to the location that I'll be filming at. If that's not possible, so if they're not available, or if it's like too far for you to go for a quick visit, then asking them to send you just a handful of photographs of the space is really important. Again, it's not something you want to go into cold, so what you don't want to do is turn up and actually it's a really small, pokey little space that you have to film in, and you can only fit one person in there, because that's not going to be very good for your supporting footage, and it's going to be very difficult for you to film an interview in there. So knowing what the space is like is really important, and as I said, just a handful of phone snaps is absolutely fine, but ideally going and visiting the space beforehand is the kind of best thing that you can do. So once you've done all of these, then it's just a case of getting that kind of narrative in your mind. As I said, you want to form some questions based on your initial conversation with them, and then planning that out as to how those questions and maybe some sample answers. So if there's something specific they said in your initial phone conversation that you thought was like a really good line, something that adds a specific point to it or a turning point, just something that's really noteworthy to kind of tell their story, and that could be a pivot point in their life that made them go down this certain route. You're going to want to add that into your film, and you're going to want to think, whereabouts in your finished film is that going to be? So having a narrative in mind will really help you kind of develop those questions a little bit more in detail and in depth as well. So once you've done all that and you've got the narrative in your mind, the next step is just arranging that date for the shoot. That's a really obviously important thing to do, but it's just making a date that works well for both of you. At the end of the day, you're not paying this person to create this piece of content, you're kind of paying them in the content itself. So you'll be delivering them the final film as something that they can use for promotional material, or something they can show their friends and family, just something that gives them a bit of value. So a date that works for both of you is obviously very important. Getting that planned in, kind of officially, really you want a good set firm date. Developing those questions, as I said, from your initial conversations, fleshing out the initial question set that you developed from your phone call. Looking at other documentaries and of a similar kind of style or subject, just to have a think about some of the answers that they're giving, will really help to build your narrative out as well. And then it's just getting everything down on paper. So a call sheet is pretty important. So a call sheet is a document that you'll put together that has things like contact details on. You can put, like, if you want to, the project name of it, the location of where you'll be filming, the timings and dates that you'll be filming at, just so there's a shared piece of paper or shared document between yourself as a filmmaker and your subject that has all that information on that, you know, do that if they need to, for example, call you on the day because there's an issue of something, or if you've put their address in and it's not quite correct, they can pick that up in the call sheet and just say, oh, you know, this isn't correct, this is what it needs to be. It's just a nice formal way of you know, putting that information across so it's shared between both parties. So other things that can really help to kind of bring your subject on board with the project more is just obviously keeping them up to date with any changes, or even like the narrative that you want to put down, exactly the type of story you want to tell. And you can do that by putting together a storyboard. Now, it doesn't have to be visual. You don't have to be amazing at drawing. It can be like a written or a visual script, basically. Or just some visuals that will go with your question set. So you can develop something like that. And just some rough sketches are absolutely fine. My personal drawing skills are pretty poor, but I'll just mark out just some ideas in terms of framing and things like that. So I'll put a storyboard together if I feel I need to, if the story is complex. If not, I'll put a shot list together. And a shot list is quite simply a list of shots that you are aiming to get on your day of filming, and that will typically evolve just around the supporting footage or B-roll. So this could be, for example, with the shoot that I'm going to be doing with Paul, it will be him kind of carving, so using his lathe to carve the wood into shape. It could be the finishing treatment that he does on the wood. It can be him putting it together. Close-ups of his face are going to be quite key ones, just to see kind of concentration. Some of the previous pens that he's made, those are quite important shots for this story that I'm going to be putting together. So it's just having that shot list and just, you know, on the day of the shoot, going through and just ticking off methodically, you know, I've got this shot and I've got this shot. And once you become more of an accomplished filmmaker, that shot list is still important to do, but you won't need to necessarily tick off all the shots. You'll turn up on site and you'll be, okay, these are the shots I need to get, I've got them written down, and you can be a bit more organic with how you shoot things as well. So as long as you have any kind of key shots written down that you need to capture on the day, then everything else around that can be quite fluid. And then the final things to do before you head off on your shoot is, obviously the night before, make sure that all of your batteries are fully charged. Make sure the media that you're going to shoot on is empty and formatted for your camera. Make sure you know your camera inside out, just so on the day, if you need to shoot in slow motion, for example, you know how to quickly get there. What you don't want to do is be fumbling around on the day with settings, and because everything isn't set up or something isn't set up correctly. Just making sure that everything works properly. So if you're bringing lights, just quick courtesy switch on before like the night before when you're kind of putting all your kit together. Just make sure everything works. The last thing you want to do is turn up and you spend time setting your light up, turn it on, and for some reason it doesn't work, or you forget a cable. Just making sure everything is together and organized and ready for your shoot. And then in terms of the shoot day, obviously you want to plan your route ahead of time. I always use Google Maps because it gives me a rough indication of how long it's going to take me to get to a location. I can then plan on what time I need to leave, and I always give myself a few minutes extra to kind of get there. I'd rather arrive early than late. So just make sure you kind of do the same thing. Don't arrive late to someone who's giving up their time for you, because they are giving up their time, and it could be on a weekend. It's definitely in their spare time. It's not kind of time that they have that they're getting paid for. So yeah, plan your route, make sure you're comfortable with getting there, make sure you arrive on time or early. And then when you get there, it's just having a walk around the space with them. So if you haven't already done that, it's just kind of going around, seeing your best opportunities for your interview and where your B-roll will take place, and also talking through with them how the day is going to pan out. So at what point you're going to do the interviews, how the B-roll will sit, and how you'll aim to capture that. So with Paul, because there are several kind of key steps to him producing these pens or creating these pens, we'll break that up just so I get enough supporting footage of him making these pens. So I'll put them in small stages and work through. So once I'm happy with the first stage, we'll move on to the next one. So I already kind of know this, and I've got this in my shot list and in my plan for the day. And then after you've kind of walked around that space and talked to them about how the day will pan out, what you want to do is just kind of put them at ease in terms of the interview side of things. If someone hasn't been on camera before, it can be quite daunting. It can be a little, kind of make them a little bit nervous to be in front of camera. For my shoot with Paul coming up, what I will do is I will aim to have him talk to me off camera. So we'll have a camera set up and he'll be talking off camera. So much like this one here, we wouldn't have this main camera. That'd be replaced with me. So I'd be talking directly to Paul, and he'll be kind of fielding his answers back to me. So we'd have this second camera as our kind of angle, and that's what we use. So that tends to put people at ease, and I'll explain a little bit more about that on the actual shoot day as well. So once you've kind of been all through that with them and they are kind of comfortable, it's then just getting your first camera angle for your interview. Now I always shoot the interview first. A lot of the kind of speech side of it, but a lot of what they're saying is going to influence the type of shots that I get afterwards. So if they pick up on something that they might not have explained about in your initial phone calls or phone conversations, then you're going to want to react to that in the B-roll, because that might be a very poignant part to put in your final edit. So you're going to want to do the interview first and then react, if you need to capture relevant B-roll that supports that as well. Then I use an app called Cadridge, and that is a framing app. You can put in the camera type that you're using as well as the lenses, so the focal lengths, and that will help you with framing. So even before I set up any equipment, I'll get that out on my phone app and I'll look at the spaces and just try and find a framing and height and things like that before I even set up my tripod. And then it's just setting up the lighting and testing the audio, and then you're ready to go for your interview. So my final bit of advice when it comes to the actual day of you filming is just to, when it comes to B-roll at least, is to shoot lots. So that's overshoot everything. You can never have kind of too much B-roll, especially for your first few projects that you work on. You can never film too much, because you'll actually work out that those shots you shouldn't drag out too much in your edit. They should be quite short, just to kind of tell the story. But we'll go through that in the edit process as well. But yeah, so last bit of advice is just to shoot lots, more than what you think that you necessarily need. So that's it for the first part of our 5-part masterclass. Now, if I was to give you 3 kind of key takeaways, as I said just then, B-roll, shoot more than what you think you need, so shoot lots. Second tip will be just to make sure that you are prepared for your shoot. So that's making sure everything is charged, everything works. And my third one is just find out as much information as you possibly can about your subject and develop all of that into a good question set. Now, when you get on a call with someone, you can, with their permission, record the call so you can kind of go back and make notes, but just ask them lots of really good questions on the call. Like have a note of questions that you want to ask them before you even get on that call with them, and then just develop a really good, doesn't need to be tons of questions, but a really good solid set of questions that you can ask them on the interview, and that will be your good steading for a really good piece of content for them. So thanks very much for watching this. The next section on this 5-part series and masterclass with Wex Photo Video is on a deep dive into the gear that I use and the gear that I'll be using on this shoot. So make sure you check that out as well.